Welcome to Inside Voices, a well-read magazine Between the Pages podcast. I'm your host, Robert Gwaltney. Joining me today is a very special guest co-host, Jeffrey Dale Lofton, the award-winning author of Red Clay Susie. Welcome, Jeffrey.
Thank you for having me, Robert. I'm excited to be here.
Jeffrey and I are thrilled to have the opportunity to chat with Zak Salih this evening, author of Let's Get Back to the Party. Zak, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me and taking time for my work.
Absolutely. So before we begin, I want to share a little bit about you with our listeners. Zak Salih earned his BA in English and Journalism from James Madison University and his MA in English from the University of Virginia. His fiction and nonfiction have appeared in Foglifter, Epiphany, Crazyhorse, the Florida Review, the Chattahoochee Review, the Millions, Apogee Journal, Kenyon Review Online, the Los Angeles Review of Books, and other publications. Let's Get Back to the Party is his debut novel. He resides in Washington, D.C. We're so happy to have you here, Zak.
Thanks. I'm happy to be here.
So some people have said some wonderful things about your debut novel. This from the Oprah magazine, an intimate saga that brims with necessary conversations about cultural diversity. And a gentleman that I've had the wonderful opportunity to correspond with, Louis Byard, the author of Courting Mr. Lincoln, had this to say: with gorgeous, searching prose, Zak Salih looks beyond the gay culture wars to find the fractured souls within and locate something deep and true and universal. This exceptional debut signals the arrival of a compelling new voice in fiction. Don't you just sort of get tingly when you hear beautiful things like that said about your work?
Well, I think the generosity of someone like Lou Byard knows no bounds, and so I'm absolutely grateful. I think any writer kind of hungers for that kind of response to their work, whether they want to admit it or not. It's never not nice to receive some praise. So it's always, on my part, it's always gratefully received with open arms.
So, and I'll be remiss if I did not share the cover of your book. Let's Get Back to the Party. We all have our cover. There we go. So I think that's a perfect opportunity, Jeffrey, for me to sort of toss it over to you and start our conversation.
Thank you, Robert. Well, that is a perfect chance to judge your book by its cover, Zak, which I love, by the way. I mean, it's just so striking. And, but I understand that you had a different idea of what you envisioned for the cover of your book. Will you tell us about that?
I mean, yeah. So I think it'd be hard pressed to find a writer who doesn't envision some kind of cover for their manuscript. I mean, whether it ends up getting published or not. And so the idea that I had in my head, because this novel deals so heavily with art, was a reproduction of one of the artworks that are discussed in the book. My career is in marketing. So of course I trusted wholeheartedly the people at Algonquin to kind of rein me in and educate me on what exactly is going to get a book noticed on a shelf or on a table in a bookstore. This was the first cover they presented me with. It's designed by a brilliant book designer named David High. And it was the kind of cover where I saw it and I thought, what a fool I'd been to think that there could be any other cover but this one. It's very striking. I think it gets you to pick the book up off the table. So it does everything that a great cover should do. And then I think after that, like the work is mine. It's my job to make sure that what's inside the cover is worth someone's time. So the way I've kind of always sold this book to other people is by saying, look, for $25.95 or $16 in paperback, you get this amazing cover and some words too. So I've kind of pitched the book as a work of art in its own, at least in terms of the cover. It's not my place to say whether the inside is up to snuff, but the cover I think is just it's wonderful.
Well, I'll be the one to say that I do believe that that the work that is your own is certainly artful in many ways.
It is.
Well, thank
Definitely.
you.
Enough. Yeah, definitely. And it can be seen, very clearly, and it pulls you in across the room,
It has good thumbnail value, which is what I'm told is very important nowadays. So it works as well, it's just as good small as it is large, I suppose. I'm not going to take that I'm not going to
No.
go any further with that, but yeah.
Well, and you can't go wrong with a lovely set of lips and glittery tears.
Yeah. And in all seriousness, I think what struck me about the cover is how it really seemed to encapsulate visually some of the things that I tried to get across in this book. I think what's particularly haunting about this particular cover and this particular face and the way that it's stylized is to me, I think what struck me on first seeing it was I kind of had to wonder whether that person was alive or dead. And I think that kind of uncertainty is a big kind of thematic backbone to this book, but also just something that I think that uncertainty is kind of alluring too. If that makes sense.
Exactly. Well, the cover is alluring. I absolutely. The novel explores what happens when a marginalized portion of society is sort of layered into the mainstream. But overall, where did the idea of your debut novel come from? What was the genesis?
Yeah. The genesis of the book, I mean, though this isn't autobiographical by any means, I mean, I maintain that my life is comfortably boring compared to the lives of these two characters. I think it was inspired by just kind of feelings I had about being, what I'll call kind of as, I'll put my anthropological hat on and describe as like a hinge generation of gay men, right? So I was born in the early 80s, and I was way too young to have any, for me, AIDS has always been history, not lived history. And at the same time, I mean, I was born too early, I think, to take advantage of a lot of the increased visibility that I think, a lot of queer youth now can enjoy, especially in schools. I mean, to be clear, this is not the case all across the country, but I think it has markedly improved, since when I was in elementary, middle school, high school, and kind of feeling, not lost, but kind of pondering other lives and other experiences that were denied me just because I happened to be born when I was, and how interlinked those experiences are with a community to which I never thought I belonged to growing up, but which I'm now happily a part of. I guess if I could put it really, I would say if there's one kind of spark that this book had, even though I'd been debating writing, about gay men in fiction for quite some time, there was this, how you're working and you go down some, YouTube corridor and your just videos are just incoming. And for whatever reason, the one video that was in my feed was of this very heartwarming conversation between a gay man who must have been, in his late 70s, and this queer teenager, and it's very heartwarming. But I think, and maybe this will give you insight into my creative mind, but I just remember thinking, God, if I was that 70-something man having this conversation with this 13-year-old boy or however old he was, I would be so racked with envy and almost kind of an anger. I think these same emotions that the two characters in my book deal with, thinking about everything that was denied me. And so I think that kind of that ferocious envy and the kind of sadness and anger that are a part of it, I think those emotions and those feelings were definitely the furnace that kind of just produced this book.
Absolutely. I was just sitting here thinking about bookstores back in the day, and I'm just a wee bit older than you. I'll say we, that's an exaggeration. I think I'm probably considerably more older than you, but I remember going into bookstores. I grew up in a small town, Southwest Georgia, a small place called Cairo. we would drive over to Tallahassee, Florida, where they had bookstores. And I recall there being a section of books. Of course, I don't think that we referred to back then in Jeffrey LGBTQ. I don't think that was a thing then. I think it was sort of like, it was just sort of what you would call it the gay section. I think, in black and white letters, it would say gay. And I remember being so drawn to that section, but not wanting to go anywhere near it for fear that someone would see me there. But I think that, Zach, like a novel like yours that is considered LGBTQ, but is mainstream literary fiction, and a multitude of young people without hesitancy can walk up and pick your book up off the shelf. It's astonishing, really, when you think about it.
It really is. It really is. Yeah.
It's a human story. That's why it is so relatable and so universal.
I mean, thank you for saying that, Jeffrey, because that's how I feel, at the risk of sounding full of self-loathing. Like, I don't identify myself as a gay writer or a mixed race writer or a first generation immigrant writer. I'm just a writer, and this to me happens to be the subject matter and the theme that I've chosen. And it's a part of my life. But I was more interested in Oscar and Sebastian as human beings, I think, and my hope, at least, is those kind of universal feelings and emotions and experiences would kind of help this book find a wider audience. I feel like, with a book like this, the gay audience is kind of already built in, right? The issue is, how do we, and this is not just of this book, but I still think of a lot of wonderful queer literature that's being written now, is how do we get audiences who are not part of this community to buy in and to invest in these characters?
Is that so defining yourself as not defining yourself as a particular kind of writer, is that for this book, or is that something that is that for your career?
I can't really say I have a career yet, but yeah, I think and maybe it's hard for other people to kind of understand, and I get that and respect it, but I just think of myself as a writer. I can't and any of these kind of, I'm not a something hyphen writer. I'm just a writer. It doesn't cross my mind to describe myself as anything but that. Yeah.
I totally get that. Jeffrey and I had this same conversation not long ago, and I shared with him that I consider myself to be a writer who happens to be gay. And again, I don't know. I think that it is hard for some people to get their head around that concept. I think but I completely understand where you're coming from, and I think that writing sort of stories that you do, I think that I would guess that about you, because you really, as Jeffrey stated, are telling a story of the universal human condition, and it is our hope that we'll be able to get beautiful work out like this into the world, to the mainstream, to be able to change lives and to be able to change thinking.
Yeah, that's very well said. I think these things like gay writer, Southern writer, these are ways, it seems to me, for readers and marketers to place us and to make sense of us. But I would argue, and I don't want to speak for the two of you, but it seems to me that most people just think of themselves as writers, and we happen to write about gay men, or we happen to write about the South, and
right, because it comes down to, you're a human being, and we're really writing oftentimes from our own frame of reference.
Yeah, exactly. That's the tricky thing about identity, right? Is it makes sense to you, like you don't have to explain it to yourself, but the kind of, it's something that it's there for other people to kind of, I don't want to say pigeonhole you. I don't want to say anything that kind of pejorative, but it's just, we're animals, right? Like we see someone and we want to understand who they are. We want something that's easily categorizable. I think that's why queerness is a big concern to a lot of people who just don't understand it because they can't immediately categorize someone.
Agreed. I wonder, when looking into the future 10 years from now, I mean, really, it's just been within the last decade that we begin to sort of look at people along spectrums, whether
Yes.
it be, gender or sexuality. So I think that we're beginning to understand that an individual can fall upon a spectrum, and so I'll be curious to see, how we're looking, what the lens at which we're looking through the world has changed over the next 10 years. It's a very fascinating time. It's a frightening time too, when you take a look at all of the steps that we've been able to take forward. And it appears that, when you look to places like Florida, the steps that we continue to take back as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I also think about, categorizing. It's more than categorizing the industry or readers categorizing you. It's a way to identify yourself, to differentiate yourself almost, I think.
Yeah.
Not just Southern or queer or whatever, but we also are categorized by genre. Like, what do you write? Well,
right. Branding.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
People want to understand you, but
I mean, you tell someone you're a horror writer, and that comes with certain expectations, not just of you, but of your work. And then, in some cases, you feel almost like a traitor writing anything but X, Y, or Z.
Yeah.
Anything.
So maybe,
yeah.
So maybe I could describe myself as on the southern spectrum, somewhere to the right.
I'm all the way to the right.
Robert, it's your identity. That's the beauty of it. You can make it whatever you like.
Well, Zach, I have a very writerly question for you.
Mm-hmm.
And it's actually, I think of this as a kind of a two-part question. So from the time I put your book down, I was really struck by, at its foundation, the structure of it. It's so symmetrical, it's so balanced, and I thought that was so beautiful. One of the beautiful qualities about it. For example, you have the two main characters, and they share the primary relationship in the book. And each of those characters embarks on a significant journey with two secondary characters, one an older man and one a younger. And you mentioned this may relate to what you were talking about earlier with the 70-year-old man and the 13-year-old. How did you craft this story in such balance? That's part one. And part two, what did you want to say with those older and younger gay men?
So the first part of your question, I am, I guess, blessed or cursed, depending on your perspective, with being the kind of writer who is unable to get into the act of writing, of embarking on a new project, unless I have some kind of sense of the structure, right? If I don't have a structure, I'm not one of those writers who can just sit and go from point A to point B, and trust my subconscious to get me there. So I needed a kind of vessel, right? That I could pour all these thoughts and ideas into, scoop stuff out if it didn't belong, add some more things, whatever. And this was the structure for me. I had the idea of telling a story that began at a wedding, with two gay men who are there, who are miserable and who don't want to be there, but for entirely different reasons. And I think having these two voices kind of set up in opposition to one another, and this narrative kind of flitting back and forth between them, it began really early, I think, in the project, and it's something that really helped me move along and helped me write. I think there were times where I was tired of writing in one voice, and so it was a blessing to be able to switch into the next voice. And perhaps a reader might feel a certain way, like they might get tired of one character, and want to move on to another character and go back and forth. And so that the experience of reading these characters, in a way, kind of mirrors the experience I had of writing them, because I wasn't convinced that having an entire novel in either of these voices would have been sustainable. To me, the power of it involves them kind of rotating or revolving back and forth, even down to the way the style in which they're written and the way in which the text appears on the page. I mean, Sebastian is very inward looking, and he's very introspective, and so his sections are just giant blocks of text. I mean, the idea being that this is a man who is literally bricking himself up, with his past, right? He's building a kind of wall, I think, against connecting with other people. On the other hand, Oscar's kind of a very kind of, as one person put it, a very kind of spiky prose, like it's very surface level, because this is someone who is very frightened, I think, in many ways of introspection, of looking inward, and having these kind of long memory rich passages. And so that structure was there to begin with. I hope that answers the first part of your question. In terms of the second part, I mean, yeah, I wanted each of these men to have these very complex, sometimes concerning, but most certainly obsessive relationships, I think, with older men or young men, or men outside of their particular kind of generation of gay life, so to speak, and to kind of see how and the ways in which those characters interact. I mean, to me, you have Oscar and Sebastian. You have Oscar, having this relationship with this kind of statesman of gay letters who's in his mid-60s, and then on the other hand, you have Sebastian, who's the high school teacher and has this relationship with one of his students. And as these relationships are kind of cultivated throughout the novel, what my intention was in looking at these kind of secondary characters, I think what Oscar and Sebastian are really looking for are themselves. Or excuse me, not themselves. Well, themselves too, but I think mostly one another as well.
So Zach, we talked a little bit previously about identity.
Yeah.
Within your novel, you focus upon sexual identity more than racial identity. Talk about that choice that you made when writing your book.
Yeah, well, so you're referring to Sebastian, who is mixed race. His mother is an immigrant from Saudi Arabia, and his father is just a white man. Not just a white man. I don't mean to discard someone like that, but you understand what I mean. That's, in all honesty, that's just how the character revealed himself to me. I mean, he grew up in Northern Virginia, as I did, and is mixed race as I am. And I think he and I both experience a certain amount of privilege that comes from being mixed race in a region or an area that's very diverse to begin with. I think even back when I was growing up, it was still diverse, and socializing and interacting with people from different races and cultures was just it wasn't something that I thought about, and not something that I got the impression other of my peers were thinking about, although I'm sure perhaps they were. So, given that, I certainly understand and respect this kind of impulse to focus on a character's racial identity, but it's, as we were kind of alluding to earlier, it's not really an impulse that I felt necessary in this particular piece, or even in any of the other things that I write. Especially because this novel was really tackling a very complex subject to begin with, and it's just kind of the economics of storytelling. And I made a conscious decision to focus on these characters' sexual identities, as opposed to their racial ones. And that being the case, I didn't see any need to, whitewash the character of Sebastian just because I wasn't going to focus on his race. I mean, that his mixed race, that heritage could be just another thing about him, and curiously, it was even empowering for me not to make it the focal point of his arc or of his experiences. It's just another aspect about him, and I personally find narratives like that very empowering. Yeah, and us brown people, we're certainly capable of having other traumas than just racial ones. So,
well, and I personally, admire the choice that you made there. For of in regards to all of your characters, Sebastian is just who he is,
yeah.
and there was no need to make a heavy-handed point about the matter.
Yeah, I didn't think so, but I've certainly been made aware that some people are disappointed with that, and that's fine. I mean, that's the beauty of reading, right? Is we all come to books for different reasons, and one book may not satisfy your needs, but there are plenty of other books out there that really focus on the intersection of queer lives and racial identity, and I think that's beautiful. But again, like for this particular story, I just that's just how the character kind of came to me. And I think it's an extension of the privilege I felt growing up as a mixed race kid in Northern Virginia.
Sort of building on Robert's question, sense of place in your book is very strong.
Mm-hmm.
The geographic setting, in DC, but also, place within the gay community. And of course, we just talked about sexual identity.
Yeah.
But within the gay community, about where you do fit in, where you don't fit in, or how you fit in. How has your place in the gay community or in the world changed since you had the idea for the book, and which the catalyst for which I think was a major milestone in the LGBTQ history?
Yeah, on a personal level, I think this is the beauty of getting older, right? Is you tend to start to prioritize what's important to you. You tend to start to realize how much of what concerned you years ago is meaningless. I mean, in the years since coming out and kind of being a part of finding my own particular place in this very diverse community with so many diverse experiences. I mean, there is that constant cultural pull, right, between what's expected of you, how you're supposed to behave, what you're supposed to think. And it can be very agonizing, I think, to try and pursue that, or to feel like, you've come into this community and, that there are kind of certain prescriptions laid out before you, or, certain kind of modes of behavior that are expected of you. I always thought about this book as not a coming out story, but a coming into story. It's a story about everything that happens to these two characters after they've come out. So, I think coming out narratives are very traditional to stories of queer people and gay men, and they're narratives that absolutely deserve to and demand to be written, and can educate a certain type of reader. But I was kind of interested in capturing these experiences of, okay, well, you've come out of the closet. What happens after that? How do you find yourself inside this community, and how do you kind of decide what's important to you? And I think, I've always said, like, what are the obligations that I have as a gay man? What are the obligations that I have as part of the queer community? And it's easy to think like, oh, you have to sleep with a certain amount of people, or you have to dress a certain way, or you have to go to particular places, or live in particular parts of the country. And to me, the only obligations I think that any queer person has are A, to be out where and when possible, and B, to recognize that one is part of a history, a communal history with a past that's completely different from your own experiences, and a future that I think that will be entirely different from your own experiences. And that's also kind of where the historical framing of the book comes in. So it starts on the heels of the 2015 marriage equality ruling, and ends a year later, almost to the day, with the Pulse nightclub massacre in Orlando, Florida. And I think that was a reflection. So I wrote about those particular moments because those are moments in the gay and queer community where I was fully immersed in my own identity. And you know, those were two kind of cultural moments or events where I could say, and I knew like those were happening to people like me, right? You know, hearing about, you know, AIDS in the 80s and early 90s, as if I was even paying attention to begin with as you know, an 8 or a 10-year-old, you know, it was always happening to other people. But marriage equality, the Pulse nightclub shooting, even today with all these book bans, and you know, all these anti-trans laws. I mean, these are things that are happening to people like me, to a community that I am a part of. So there's a kind of more, there's an urgency to that, I think now, you know, just because it you know, what am I trying to say? There's an urgency to it now, because it's happening to people like me. I think so that kind of historical framework really kind of helped kind of, I guess, explain that in a sense. And also the pessimistic thing is, I think, you know, in 2015 with marriage equality, there's this kind of naivety that I think a lot of us felt, myself included, like, oh, marriage equality is passed, like, you know, this is it, like, you know, progress is here, and history, unfortunately, or you know, the universe has a way of proving us wrong, and you know, showing that there's still plenty of work to be done, and perhaps there always will be.
You know, what I hear from you is that maybe a third responsibility, which is to help each other. Is that also something?
Yeah,
that
that's
reading
fair. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
telling the story, that's essentially what you've done, I would say.
Yeah, these are two men who are diametrically opposed to one another, but who are forced to do what they have to do, right? Which, as you said, is to look out for one another and to take care of one another. I mean, that's kind of at the core of any definition of community, it seems to me. So yeah, I love that. Absolutely, you're absolutely right.
I love the concept of coming into, and I was contemplating that as I was listening to you speak about it. And I was just sort of tracing back my own journey from the time that I first came out to who I am today.
Mhm.
And for me, I think the progress is that my gayness is not perpetually within my consciousness.
Yeah.
You know, I am just sort of who I am. And of course, I'm fortunate to live, you know, here in Atlanta, Georgia, where we do sort of live in this protected bubble where we don't have to think about it as much as someone who might have to live in a more rural place where I grew up, like
Yeah.
South Georgia, or where Jeffrey grew up in Warm Springs, Georgia. So it's fact, but I when we were talking about, you know, all the things that are happening within the political world around us, that lack of consciousness of my gayness, though, is I'm becoming you know, I'm feeling it creep back in a bit, because
Yeah.
you know, I am a bit worried about where we are currently and where we might go.
I mean, I think one should be worried. One should always be vigilant. But at the same time, I mean, I'll be damned if I let these people hijack my life, right? There's a difference between being a vigilant and being aware of something, and letting fear dominate your life. And I didn't come out of the closet for that. But I think that's only something that the perspective of getting older and accruing experience, you know, has taught me, is you know, the importance of, pardon my language, but just, you know, there's a power in not caving into the opinions, you know, the opinions of other people, right? There's a strength in not giving a shit what random strangers think about you. I mean, if we did, we'd all still be in the closet. We'd never come out. So at a certain point, you know, one has to say, you know, damn it, like, I'm going to live my life, even under threat of, you know, something happening to me. And that to me is at the core of pride. I think that is what it means to be proud.
So my fur baby Truman agrees with you. I hear him howling in the back. So if you hear him, just know that he's in full support of you, Zach.
Perfect. You know what? I need every reader I can get. That's perfect. We love
So,
Truman.
so Zach, in a previous interview, you said something that fascinated me, this concept of painting with words. And I think on that note, I'd love for you, if you're comfortable doing so, reading us an excerpt from your novel.
Yeah, sure. I will be happy to. So I guess a little bit of preface. As I alluded to earlier, there are alternating sections and different voices. And I think given the nature of your question, I'm going to read a few passages from written in the voice of Sebastian, who is a high school teacher. He teaches English and art history. And so a lot of Sebastian's perspective revolves around works of art. And there are passages scattered throughout the novel in which he encounters works of art and they conjure different memories. So I think I will just read a couple of those. They're relatively brief. This is Watson and the Shark by John Singleton Copley, 1778. I'm on a field trip with my third grade class to the National Gallery of Art. My mother is a chaperone, keeping up the rear behind a group of 8 kids who follow the docent through the galleries. We find ourselves in front of an enormous oil painting. That doesn't look like a shark, someone says. That's because it was invented by Mr. Copley, the docent explains. Someone asks, why is that man naked? I think it's a girl, someone else says. Look at her long hair. A new kid, Oscar Burnham, asks, did he die? No, the docent says. The young man was rescued. He lived a long, happy life. Later, during lunch on the grass outside the museum, I see the new kid sitting alone. He looks lonely, my mother says. Go over and talk to him. I take my lunch and sit next to the new kid, the two of us at a slight remove from the rest of the group. You just moved near my house, I say. I know, the new kid says. I see you playing outside from my bedroom. Come out next time, I say. The new kid just has carrots with his ham sandwich, so I share my grapefruit roll-ups. We spend the rest of lunch pressing small squares of dried fruit into the roofs of our mouths. We attach small strips to our tongues and pretend we're lizard people. This is the shaft scene, artist unknown, 17,000 BCE. I'm 10 years old in my father's basement with Oscar. I'm sitting in an old wingback chair, flipping through an enormous book on the history of Western art, trying to stay busy while waiting for my turn on my Game Boy. I toss the thick pages, working my way to the end of the book and back to the beginning. I think the more I concentrate, the more I absorb in my mind what's directly in front of me, the faster time will pass until our agreed upon 10-minute rotation. I come across reproductions of primitive paintings on the rock walls of some old French cave. I stare at the galloping herds, trace the curve of a cow's brown back with a finger. I turn the page and see a crude illustration of a bull knocking over what looks like a man. It reminds me of drawings on the blacktop at Cardinal Elementary, the flowers and suns and salamanders in colored chalk, the cuss words and boobs and boners in black magic marker. There's a slash above the man's stick figure legs that looks like a dick. Below the image is a caption, photograph of walls and the shaft of the dead man at Lascaux Cave. I look up at the back of Oscar's head, the neck poking out from his sweater, the hair like the fuzz on my father's tomato plants. I ask, is it my turn yet? No, Oscar says, I haven't died. Possessed by an uncanny, inexplicable compulsion, the same one perhaps that must have propelled these ancient cave people to decorate their ancient cave walls, I want to reach over and place my hand on Oscar's neck, to touch each individual hair, to feel that secret warmth. I want to fall in Oscar's lap and curl up kitten-like in those long arms. Considering how much time we spend together, how often Oscar's at my house on weeknights and weekends, it makes a strange sort of sense to me. I'm going to piss, I say. Whatever, Oscar says. I rise from my father's chair, then pretend to trip on the hassock. I drop the art book on the carpet and throw myself awkwardly onto Oscar's back. Shit, Sebastian, he says, my game. I know I can't stay here for long. It's dangerous. This isn't what two boys are supposed to do. Maybe brothers, certainly not friends. Pushing up against Oscar's shoulder blades, I brush my lips against the back of Oscar's neck, feel the tickle of near invisible hair. Oscar stiffens, then he shoves me off. Stop that, he says. Then, Weirdo. He reaches for the Game Boy and resumes playing. We spend the rest of the afternoon in silence. Oscar's 10 minutes on my Game Boy are up, but I let him keep playing, hoping my generosity will make him forget what just happened. I sit in the chair with the art book and think how stupid and strange I am. Will he tell his parents or someone in class, Sebastian tried to kiss me? Blech. Then I think of how often Oscar tells me he doesn't like his parents, doesn't like the other kids at school, and I feel a little relief. Think what you like, Sebastian, but keep it to yourself. Don't ever do that again. Looking at Oscar hunched over the Game Boy, I daydream of empty caves and echoing wind, of holding someone close by primal firelight. Then my father calls us up for dinner.
Oh, thank you, Zach. That's lovely.
You.
Beautiful. The longing in it, the longing and the self-reproach that comes immediately afterwards. It's just so beautiful.
Thank you. Thank you.
So, Zach, in a letter to Oscar, Sean ponders, perhaps experience without transformation isn't experience at all.
Mhm.
I'm not really asking you a question other than just maybe talk a little bit about that quote.
Yeah, well, so that letter, and I think Oscar's relationship with Sebastian is rooted in the idea of sexual pursuit, right? This idea of defining oneself through one's sexual experiences, accumulating a body count, so to speak. And I in my own personal life, I've struggled with, whether that, the relationship between sex and experience and kind of membership in this community. And I suspect, there are other people who struggle or who have struggled in the same way. But I think, that, and it's kind of difficult to talk about that letter, I think, without giving away a huge part of the novel. So you'll forgive me, I'm a little loath to do that, only to say that I think one of Oscar's chief dilemmas is whether or not what he is actually pursuing, what he is fixated upon, can count as experience, can count as something from which we grow. And is it just a story to tell, or is it a story to tell with some meaning for our lives? I think that's the best that I can do without kind of
perfect
and spoiling.
Thank you. We do not want to spoil it for others. So, Zach, on the topic of legacy, how would you like to best be remembered as a writer or human being?
Oh my gosh. I feel like I should get in my casket right now. I that's a lovely question. I'm not sure how to answer that. I think being remembered just on its own, I think is as close as one can come to achieving a sort of immortality. I'm not convinced yet that books are, I guess I'm not convinced yet about any kind of longevity, in terms of me being a writer. I guess I would just say, if they were going to chisel something on my tombstone, it would say he was a decent human being, right? I feel like that's, other than RIP, like that seems to be the most the kind of legacy, I guess, that makes the most sense to me. Because being a writer is only part of the human being that I am, right? And so I in a strange way, I would rather my life had more meaning, I think, than my work. But Robert, I'm only 40, so if we do this again when I'm 60 or 80, I will absolutely have a different answer for you.
We will follow up on your 60.
To be continued.
Jeffrey.
Yeah.
Absolutely, to be continued. Zach, it's been lovely. Thank you so much for taking the time to come by and enter into conversation with my co-host Jeffrey Dale Lofton this evening.
Oh, thank you both so much. This was really lovely, and again, I appreciate you giving so much time to me and my work. It really means a lot.
Absolutely. And I wish you all the success with Let's Get Back to the Party. Zak Salih,
And you too,
debut
with your
novel.
respective books as well.
Thank you. So, gentle listeners, we just ask that you keep turning those well-read pages. And until next time, I'm Robert Gwaltney.